Well, hello everyone, and welcome yet again to another Ask the Hive series. We are coming to you live this Sunday at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And for the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about process mapping, digital architecture, the importance of having digital infrastructure documented and blueprinted out. And today we are going to be talking about the digital infrastructure pyramid and why it's so paramount to have it. And it's a good visual representation of what is happening with most business owners in today's marketplace. But for those of you that don't know us, my name is Mike. This is my wife, Jasmine. We are the co-founders of RevForce, and it is our job to come live to you every single week to provide you with the best information and education so you can go grow your businesses and be more technically savvy and relevant in today's digital marketplace. So let's get started.
Yeah, so today we are going to go ahead and jump off here into the digital infrastructure pyramid. So just like Mike said, we've been talking a lot about the foundations the last couple of weeks, and a lot of people who work alongside of us, the hardest part about like building a business today is that in the physical world, you can see business. And so you understand all the parts and pieces. But now that we've gone more and more digital, that infrastructure isn't always as visible as what it is in the physical world. So a lot of people don't see all the building blocks that actually make their business run. And so today we kind of hope that we can kind of showcase that how businesses are built in the past and how they're being built now that we're using more technology first, and why that actually matters for you, regardless of the business that you're building today, why this is important, and why, more importantly, that you probably have been feeling like no matter how much technology I start adding into my business, the things that were supposed to make our life easier is making me feel like my business is harder to run than it was maybe even 5 years ago. And so hopefully by the end of today's session, it'll make a lot more sense why that might actually be happening. So let's go ahead and kick right off.
Yeah, and a lot of times we want to talk about let's go from like a historical background. I think that's the best way to make context. And obviously businesses back in the day it was a brick and brick operation or a brick and mortar operation. And that was great because it was simple to understand that businesses needed to have each new piece built on top of the layer that came before it. So the surrounding pieces were all operational. Whereas in today's digital marketplace, it's not necessarily the case. And it's also these intangibles or invisible components that are sometimes hard being pegged down.
Well, and I would say that really before we had all of our stuff being online, it was easy to build processes one step at a time or brick by brick because the humans were kind of like the glue that held everything together. Like human beings are the execution layer. And if they're trained well, they can usually infer some of the things that we are not being able to do with technology today. Like you're able to make the guess when data is missing that should have been there. You're able to see the processes and where the gaps are, just kind of fill in those layers that you don't see happening when we start working with technology. So, if the work is imperfect processes, or you can transfer information between disconnected systems, a person can remember expectations. They can interpret incomplete instructions. They can reformat inconsistent data. They can compensate for missing documentation, adjust when the surrounding environments change, and ask questions when something doesn't make sense. When a new function was added to the business, the organization could often train a person to fit that function into the structure that already existed. And the process didn't always need to be perfectly designed in advance because the human being was the one performing it, could become the adaptive layer. So the principle is that historically human labor often compensated for that missing architecture that isn't so forgiving in the digital world.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So the human execution layer, obviously, it was basically, it concealed the architectural weaknesses, right? Like Jasmine mentioned, the human beings kind of picked up the slack. But when new functions were added, humans supplied the missing judgment, and obviously they compensated for it. And sometimes what the fail point on that aspect is when the human being eventually leaves, right? When the human being leaves, there goes the architecture, then the overall infrastructure is weakened by default.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that we're seeing out in the marketplace when it comes to the difference between, let's say, junior talent and senior talent, right? Like someone who's been on the job for a lot longer has been able to see all the missing gaps in the business, and they just know to do things. It's like, well, Karen always does it this way, or, Lisa over in accounting, yeah, she just always put everything in a spreadsheet and that's how we know. And so things end up starting to rely on tribal knowledge when the human is the one actually adapting these different layers, right? So if we consider a traditional customer onboarding process, for instance, a salesperson can close a deal and then send an email to the delivery manager. The delivery manager can copy that customer's information into a spreadsheet, and someone can create that project folder. Another employee can send the welcome message, and if information is missing, someone's going to notice, someone's going to ask a question, and they're going to complete the task manually. The process could function even when the data was incomplete, even when the system was disconnected, even when the naming conventions aren't consistent, even when the responsibilities are loosely defined, and even when the process existed mostly in someone else's head. The people operating the processes are supplying the missing judgment and the coordination, and they were not merely just performing the work. They were also acting as the translator, the router, the integrator, the quality control system, the exception handlers, the memory, the documentation, and the connective infrastructure. The business appears to have been working and have a working process. However, it's continuously being repaired while also executing. And we all know that. Like, we've all worked with somebody who it just seemed like work was always great until this person left. And then we found out exactly how much of the infrastructure was being held together by that person.
It's that old cliche. You don't know how good you have it until it's gone. And then you realize, man, things were a lot smoother when that person was in your life or inside your business, right? So let's look at the modern execution layer, and it's really removing the adaptive layer. So technology nowadays removes labor from execution, but it also removes the human adaptability that's compensated for that poor infrastructure. So human beings, we're adaptive, and we can kind of move in and out of the environment when it's necessary. But technology removes that labor from that execution, and also removes the human adaptability that was compensating. So that means if the machine doesn't know what to do, then eventually the human doesn't know how to do it either.
Well, and like you were just saying, in the modern economy is more of this execution layer, and it's great because things like workflows and automation, integration, databases, AI assistants, AI agents, and decision systems are all becoming like the norm now. Like, people are expecting, even self-service systems, but these systems, they can't execute without having the logic required, right? So unlike a human being who can kind of infer, the AI is going to do what it was trained to do. And so with that, yes, we lose the fact that AI systems can rapidly execute, and so that scale is there. But if the business logic isn't there, then you are going to be scaling chaos, and we see this a lot.
Or the system is going to infer its own logic. It's going to insert its own logic of what it thinks the next step it needs to be, and that might not be the right next step for that business operation.
Exactly. It's a lot less forgiving if there's missing structure, and automation can't reliably infer which customer record is correct, what vague status means, what expectation the founder would have approved, whether two differently formatted names refer to the same service, what should happen when information is missing, which employee should own an undefined responsibility, which system contains the authoritative data, and why processing was designed a particular way. A human being may recognize the context and adapt, but a system follows the instructions it has been given. And that's why everybody wants to get to, agentic AI. We're hoping that at some point it can start to bridge some of these gaps, but we are still seeing that no matter what, there is a certain level of the AI can't know, or it's not a mind reader to know exactly what it is that you want if you're not giving it specific instruction.
There needs to be a human driver, right? Absolutely. So modern businesses must become more architecture first, really. And then that's the thing that most people try to negate because they want to go fast. So they prioritize speed over structure, but everything stems eventually from the architecture. And as more execution becomes digital, the underlying data, ownership of that information, the processes, automations, relationships, identity, access protection, handoffs, logic, cybersecurity, you name it, it must be made explicit before the reliable automation can really, really occur.
Well, and the interesting part about it, and we talk about this a lot because we primarily work with the SMB market, or the small to medium-sized market. And for them, honestly, up until, let's say, the last 10 to 15 years, most of the work was done manually. Most of it was done through, rigorous training. If you were scaling a business, you were scaling it through human efforts. So there was a lot of controlled like SOP and documentation to ensure like we as the humans were like, I would say, the first version of robots.
Well, or we joke about the micromanager, right? That was always there, like, almost like watching like a hawk to make sure that the job was done correctly. And that was the first kind of harness or the quality assurance or reinforcement to make sure that person was doing their job.
Exactly. But those of us that have come from the enterprise world, who've been working with enterprise level software or enterprise level companies for a while, they understand that new business initiatives are never just built brick by brick. They are planned. There is feasibility planning cycles. There's actually even a lot of times like research and development that goes into whether or not the entire process they want to build is even possible. There's money that's invested into that. But as a small business, you don't really have that luxury. So you don't have the ability for you to spend months and months developing the architecture. You kind of have to be out testing it.
Mm-hmm.
But this conversation is really not necessarily about, building your business. Although if you take these principles into your business from the day one and you're building from the ground up from day one, you're going to find it's much easier to scale later. However, at the end of the day, we're not talking about, you having to build your entire business from a blueprint to start with. You can still build piece by piece. It's just understanding what layers of building need to come before the others. And this is where the whole slapping AI on top of dirty data and expecting it to be able to give your customers great insights is probably not going to work.
Yeah, and there's always an order of operations. Whether you think it or not, there needs to be some logic. And when you ask someone questions like, well, why did you do it this way? And it's like, well, I don't know. Well, that's not a good enough response. You did it that way because of something in your tribal knowledge that you're holding in your cranium forced you to do it that way. You just weren't acknowledging it yet.
So basically, a pyramid is built from the bottom up, right? So you can't come in and use the capstone of the pyramid and build downwards, because if you did that, you would end up having a top heavy base, and we're going to talk about in a second. But digital infrastructure, it works just like building up a pyramid from the base down. Every layer depends on the layer before it about how it's set up as far as the strength of the layers and how those layers are aligned and structurally connect together, right? So if we look at a physical pyramid, it cannot be constructed starting with your capstone, and the digital infrastructure has to be set up in this way. So the top layers of the pyramid is your precision capabilities. These are your specialized, temporary, experimental, tools that you're building. These are all the new AI widgets that everyone's coming out with. They're really cool and they're fun to play with, but they don't really have as good functional capability in your business if we're not actually taking in the foundation as part of that process. But below that are your specialty systems. These are your functional and industry specific capabilities. Below that is your orchestration layer. This is your automation, integration, workflow, and AI agents. Then you have your operations, which is your processes, your responsibilities, your standards, and your handoffs. And then finally at the base is the foundation. This is the organized data, the ownership, the access, the identity, and the controls. So the lower layers establish the organized, trustworthy data, ownership, and administrative controls. And then you define the processes, the standard information, clear responsibilities, system relationship, and operational rules. Then the upper layers use the foundation to support the automation, the specialized AI systems, advanced reporting, precision application, temporary tools, and emerging capabilities. When the base is built first, each new layer has something stable to rest upon. This is an architectural first business. The companies begin by establishing the structured conditions required for future capability, and then they add new tools and functions without rebuilding the entire environment every single time. But this is how most people's businesses are built.
Yeah, obviously it's an upside down pyramid, and no one's probably even told them that it was, because they start with the capabilities, but they're not even building out their own individual capacity or organizational capacity, right? So a business can be tool rich, and a lot of us are doing that, where single point solutions or these AI systems that you can, for less than $100 a month, you can subscribe to several, half a dozen, maybe a dozen plus. But so you have all these systems. And you have people, you have personnel on your team, and the activity is dense while trying to basically have a very poor infrastructure. And we know that that's not feasible long term. And so most businesses are doing everything in the reverse order. So think about it. Good news here is if you're in a position where you have an upside down pyramid, no problem. Just do a reverse chronological order and you'll be A-okay, right? So for the tools that you're using to create more complexity, and the company adds people to operate them, those people then create informal processes and make the tools not necessarily they can work together, but maybe not work together as well as you'd like them to. And then later, all the business is trying to attempt is to organize the data, establish ownership, and document everything. And it's just not a good result.
Yeah.
So the result is, again, an inverted pyramid, and the widest and heaviest part of the structure, it sits at the very top. And obviously anything that's top heavy is bound to just fall right over.
Well, and this is exactly like you said. I think that I would say this is the classic case scenario that we find most of our clients coming to us with, right? Like, it didn't start out a big mess. It started out with, hey, we have a problem that we need to have solved. So we went on the internet and we found a tool. Hey, I need, booking is crazy. I need to have some way to start booking all of our appointments. So they picked a booking tool.
So I think you make the point here that, like, they were already in a an emergency situation. So they were operating out of emotion. Like, we just need a booking system. So I just found this one, or I needed this type of system, so I just purchased this one because it was a quick fix.
Well, and this is the thing too, right? Oftentimes the people who are making some of these decisions about the technology are the least aware of the capabilities of that technology, which is why we have gotten into so many client circumstances where they're running 3 or 4 different CRMs. They have no idea that they have a lot of crossover happening. They're using one CRM to actually track their leads. They're using one CRM to track their marketing, activity. They're using one CRM for helping to onboard some of their clients, and they could just have chosen one of the tools. They would have done all of those things, right? But this is usually what ends up happening, is that there are these singular problems that are happening. An organization basically is picking out one of these tools to help them with a problem they have. And then that ends up causing more problems, because now they need somebody else to come in and help them to try to integrate it into their system.
Or untangle it first to begin with.
And then now that person, depending on where their specialty lies, these tools might integrate with 3 or 4 other systems within their business. And this person's very niched into, let's say, marketing. And we've seen this a lot too. A lot of business owners, let's say their marketing infrastructure is not coming from anything that the owner chose themselves. It's coming from a vendor they hired to do a marketing service. And the only reason the vendor is in this equation at all, giving them infrastructure, is because the vendor can't reliably develop their service or provide their service if there isn't any infrastructure for them to do that. So we often see abandoned infrastructure where someone was brought in to do a campaign. They bought in something like, let's say, Active Campaign, and now this business owner has an Active Campaign account and they're continuing to maintain it, but all they're literally using it for is just a list building tool. They're not using it for any of the other features, and they're on a mid-level tier because of the time that they did this one campaign 4 years ago. So, but they don't know to either eliminate the tool, to migrate the tool. They have no idea about what this tool is or how it got in their system. And oftentimes we find there are people spending thousands of dollars every month on software that they are either not using anymore, don't know what it's for, but they're too afraid to rip it out because they're unsure of what it might be supporting. And that's kind of a scary situation to be in.
And they're not going to call their previous service provider, because obviously the service provider is going to charge them for it. So they're kind of stuck, like, okay, do I continue paying, or do I just completely eliminate it and cut my losses and then hope that it doesn't do too much collateral damage inside my business?
Exactly. So like you just said, the weight amplifies the structural failure. So the whole point is that the trigger might be hey, we need a new AI agent automation added. And then that effect is going to increase the, interpreting the existing information that's in the system. But the result is that now you have more duplicate records, more disconnected systems, more manual reconciliation. And now the founder is being there's more founder intervention than ever before. So this is where you can get yourself in trouble, where you think that the technology is going to save you time, and in actuality ends up costing you more time because it was easier just to go back to doing it manually. And we see this all the time, where it's not about it's not about adoption, it's about the adaptation. Like, if you can't get your team to adopt the new process, they're going to abandon it. So you may have spent thousands and thousands of dollars on software, and we're seeing this right now. The difference between we're finding is, like, between the AI demo and the actual AI capability inside of a business, that integration layer is usually whether or not a human being is able to actually integrate it effectively into the business owner's environment. Yes, everything in demo format is great, but it's a whole nother story when it has to adopt to the actual like data that you have, your circumstances, your workflows,
and also all the unforeseen variables, right? Like in any project, there, you try to do your best to account for all the variables, but there's certain things that obviously they just show up, and you have to deal with them accordingly.
Yeah. So, new tools are going to create another source of data. A new employee is going to create another version of the process. A new automation is going to create another dependency. A new department creates another handoff. And a new AI agent is going to increase the speed at which existing information is interpreted and acted upon. So if the foundation is not organized, the new capability does not resolve the problem. It actually amplifies it. And this is what we like to talk about, is the difference between a capability and capacity.
Mm-hmm.
You may have the ability to purchase capabilities now cheaper than you've ever been able to purchase them, but that does not mean that you have the capacity to actually wield that capability. And that is why a lot of businesses are going to start fighting over premium talent, people who actually do have the capacity to understand how these tools work, why they work the way they work, understanding the system from end to end, understanding all of the variables that come into building systems of this status.
Quality, I mean, these quality talent, they're going to be a hot commodity.
Mm-hmm.
That, no doubt about that. And because, it's important that the humans adopt to the environment. And what we found in the past is that, humans need to adapt to it, because it doesn't make any sense to create a wonderful system, but no one is using it. Or worse, they're using it not in the way that it was originally designed to do. And we see this happen all the time, where people we oftentimes joke that it's easier to change or to upgrade the operating system than it is the operator.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people just are that much more reluctant to change. But AI does make things flexible, but it's also unforgiving of missing structure, right? And it does not eliminate the need for any architecture. And over time, what happens, it actually increases the value of it, or actually depends on it even more.
Exactly. So when we really look at it, it boils down to this. A human executed environment is that you can add a new function, you can assign a person, you can train that person, and then the person is going to adapt to the existing environment. That is how we've been running business for decades. However, in a system executed environment, you have to define the data first. You have to define the process. You have to define the rules and the relationships, and then you have to select and configure the system. Technology is going to execute that function. And just like you said, like, there's a reason why there's an org chart in an enterprise level environment, because before the system was executing it, it was a human being called a manager, and it was their job to make sure that everything that should get executed at the rate it should be getting executed, the way it should be executed, by who. All of that was being done by a human that can now be replaced by systems, but it's going to be replaced by a person who encoded that logic into the system. So we really still need a person who's going to encode the logic, no matter which way you look at it.
And we have to define it too, because the enemy of duplication is discretion. Can you imagine every time someone's like, just use your own discretion? Well, that person's discretion is different than the next person's discretion based on their information, based on their experience, based on their existing logic and knowledge of what's going on, right? And then so you have several different variables or several different outcomes. How do you know then which one is the right one when, again, everyone's doing it their own way? Or in this particular instance, the machine operates in a different fashion every single time. There is no way to know and to reel it in of how do we actually completely make a process streamlined and executable.
And more importantly, I think this is one of the most underrated pieces of that is, and we've even seen this quite a few times, like even in the high level ecosystem, is that technology does not stop advancing. Meaning you may have set up workflows 6 months ago, 6 weeks ago, and a new technology update, the software itself gets an upgrade, and all of the logic and the workflows that you had set before all break because someone didn't realize that now I was using a workaround for this technology, and now that's actually a native feature. You have to have somebody who truly understands the system so they can go back and adapt the system, make changes as it goes. It is a living organism. It's a mechanism that is going to continue to grow just as well as human beings used to adapt quickly as the market changed. Our software doesn't always adapt as easily because it needs a person focusing in on that logic.
Yeah, I mean, or a certain feature set is going to be sunset soon, meaning it's going to be retiring or it's out of support, so they don't support it anymore. And you have to get pushed and migrate to the new one. And you only have a limited window in order to do that. Because if you don't, then anything that was built upon that will just eventually just cease to exist. And then what happens?
Exactly. So the whole point is architecture has to come before acceleration. The modern business cannot treat infrastructure as something as if you can just organize it after you grow. Growth increases the cost of every unresolved structural problem. So the greater the volume of customers, employees, data, tools, workflows, integrations, automation, and AI activity, the more difficult it becomes to repair the base underneath it with them later, right? So architecture must therefore be there before the acceleration. This does not mean that the business must design every function or detail before taking any action. It actually means that the business must establish enough foundational structure that every new ability can be added without destabilizing what already exists. And this is the piece that we see a lot, especially with people who are in the marketing field. Like, people want to come in and just pour on the field of how much can we market. And especially now that AI has really rapidly increased the ability for you to put out more content, to automate more content, to create more marketing activities altogether. But here's the thing, more marketing activities without the equal opposite side of sales activity, sales processes, delivery processes, it's going to break your system. So you really need to make sure that you understand. And honestly, we've even seen this happen where, people that don't know their lifetime value of their customers, or they don't know their CAC, the cost of acquisition, they can end up spending more money in ads and activity when they don't realize, oh, you have a 21-day sales cycle. Well, all of those numbers at scale, you're not talking hundreds of dollars, you're talking tens of thousands or even millions of dollars. One mistake when things are automated or accelerated can actually have devastating things on your business that couldn't have happened when you weren't automating. You would have figured it out while you were still manually in the process. So a lot of this is talking about like what it means to scale. But in today's day and age, you can actually scale relatively quickly if you do have a good foundational system and understand how processes work.
And I like here what we put in here. The standard or the goal is not a perfect prediction, but the goal is to be deliberate when you are building and when you are constructing. And it's super powerful to understand that, because a lot of people are like, well, I don't want to architect and do all this stuff because 10 days from now it's going to be something completely different, or 10 months from now it's going to be completely. So just go as you want. And it's like, no, that's not necessarily the case, because then you're making hard adjustments, hard pivots, and over time that leads eventually to burnout.
Well, and again, so if we go back to this whole new order of how you build your business, if you focus on the foundation, these are likely things that are not going to be changing as rapidly. Correct. As well. So
they will change, but not to the rate of what other things are changing.
The reason I think so many people feel like business is rapidly changing is because they are focusing on the top two to three layers of the pyramid, and those things are rapidly changing. But if you focus at the base of the pyramid, these are the things that are standard, that are structural, that are probably not going to change about your business. These are things like, what is your mission? What is the problem that your business is trying to solve? Who are the types of businesses and or customers that you're trying to fix these problems for? These types of things are probably not going to change overnight. Like your problem that you're trying to solve isn't going to change overnight. So focusing your products, your solutions, and the infrastructure around the things that are going to stay true today and probably going to stay true the next 6, 12, 18, 24 months, that is where the majority of your effort and energy should go in, versus spending a whole bunch of time optimizing a small little process at the top of the pyramid layer. So if we really look at it, the first layer is all about organization, and it's the foundational piece, because it is all about your ownership, your identity, your access, your security, your data, your source of truth, administrational control. Hopefully that's not changing every single day.
Yeah. Hopefully you're not switching co-founders or co-owners every 10 days. I mean, that might be, who knows?
So this should be something that you can foundationally sit down and actually spend time with. And I would really argue spend quite a bit of time now with your source of truth and the data structure, because if you want to get the most out of your AI today, it may seem counterproductive to spend an incredible amount of time sitting down and really going through all of the data that you have and cleaning that data so that it is a verifiable truth for your AI, but the outputs are going to be 10 times better. Because if you say this a lot, Mike, the master copy has to be worth duplicating. Nothing is worse than having made a copy of something, had a few typos in it, and then copied 5,000 copies with typos, right? Like that would have been very devastating in the physical world if you had a typo and you made 5,000 copies of it, because now you just lost 5,000 pieces of paper and all the
ink and all that.
There was serious consequences in the physical infrastructure. And I think that's part of the reason why we do go so fast, is because we're not able to see the physical implications of these kinds of problems. Like that would have been something that you'd have been like, wow, I wasted physical material. But in the digital world, what you're wasting is labor time, like cost of labor. You're also risking your reputation. What if you sent out 5,000 emails and you accidentally sent them out with a link to your competitor because you bought a snapshot from somebody and the link was in it?
Or the promo code for the, maybe the discount was inaccurate. The percentage is supposed to be 10% and you put 15%. I don't know, depending on the margins. Just a simple thing like that, or miscommunication, it could lead to destruction.
So oftentimes you don't recognize the cost until after a mistake has happened. And so this is the reason why taking time, really organizing the foundation is super important. But the second layer is all about defining your operations. And so this goes back to what we talked about on one of the earlier Ask the Hive sessions. Like, how do you make a process map and start to lay out what the technical architecture is if you haven't really defined what those operational processes are? So clarifying the outcomes, understanding the responsibilities, the standards, the handoffs, the exceptions. Like, you can't really start encoding that into your team or into technology if the processes aren't already clear. So no matter what, whether you're implementing technology or not, taking time to organize your operations is going to be beneficial for your business.
Yeah.
So those two layers, no matter what you do, will always be beneficial to your business, regardless of the technology, regardless of the team members. This is going to help you grow by making sure that those two things are done.
Yeah, and then you have to obviously design that orchestration, because you have to determine how this information is going to move, what systems are going to connect, trigger actions, the decisions are going to occur, both machine and human, right? And how the exceptions are handled, what should remain innately human and what should be innately machine or automated based. This is important because, again, if you want to go fast, slow is smooth, smooth is fast. And so sometimes slowing it down and thinking truly what needs to happen, but also at the same time, if it is a human that's doing the job or if it is a machine, how quickly can you swap out that person for someone else? How quickly can someone else jump in and fall right in sync and know what to do on that particular job or operation?
And then I think the top layers, like this is where everyone's at right now. Everything's vibe code this, everything is get to market fast, test. It's great for prototyping. It's great for, testing out new environments. It's great for, trial and erroring processes that used to take months or years to get data and feedback on. So you don't want to skip these. It's not that they're less important. It's just that you shouldn't be relying on these to be the foundations of the business. The business will grow piece by piece, but every piece is now placed according to, the actual architecture, and understanding that, you want to make sure that, when you're looking at your specialized capabilities, that you're configuring systems for your departments, services, industries, and customer journeys are all based upon that foundational information. So if you don't know that information first, you could be spending an incredible amount of time. And, we've seen this, people spending, 3, 6, 12 months optimizing a process that actually wasn't even targeting the customer that they wanted.
Or now you're intentional with what you're choosing. And this can seem counterproductive, because you can go months, maybe half a year, and it feels like you're accomplishing nothing. It's like, man, are we even doing anything? Are we making any progress? And then if you're doing that for, like, let's say month 1 through month 6, all you're doing is getting your documents in order, you're getting your processes in check. And then month 7, you turn on the gas, or you step on the gas by, okay, now I can start building this, I can start acquiring this. It's just no different than, like, if you ever go to the grocery store and you never had a list of what you need to get from the grocery store, what do? You weave in and out of the aisles, and, oh yeah, we need to go over here. Oh man, we got to go back to the dairy. Oh, forgot this over here. Versus when you have a list, you actually can plan your route through a grocery store, and you can be in and out more effectively than you ever had before. It's the same thing here.
Well, and that's great. What happens when you didn't plan and you go home and you're halfway through cooking the meal and you realize you missed something?
Exactly, because you forgot to write down this primary ingredient for that meal.
You know, this is no different. And understanding that in today's day and age, people are spending so much time on, like I said, all the shiny object AI tools. And don't get me wrong, we love AI tools as well. But there's a reason why you can see the vast difference between somebody who already has the capacity to use these capabilities and someone who doesn't. And we can see it by what they're creating, right? It's, to me, no different than, you know, having somebody who understands how to do mathematics. You know, if you give them a calculator, they're going to be able to output more calculations faster than the person who doesn't know how to do the math equation to begin with. And they're going to be more accurate answers, and they're going to be able to do a lot more with less. So it's no different here. You have to be able to understand that it's a capacity problem, that you have to first define those bottom layers so that you can take advantage of the top layers, like you were saying, and do a lot more with less, right? So brick by brick is not the problem. The problem is not incremental construction. Every business has to develop over time. The difference is whether or not the bricks are being placed according to the structural design. Historically, humans could compensate with the new bricks not being perfectly aligned. In the digital execution, though, that misalignment is going to create broken data, failed automation, conflicting logic, and inaccessible information, integration errors, and so much more. So the new requirement is not that the entire pyramid must be completed before the business is operable. Like, that isn't obviously possible, but it's the new requirement is that business has to understand which layer it's actually building and what must exist below it. So if you would like to have someone build you an AI agent who's going to be taking the phone calls for your business, it'd probably be pretty important that you review some of your recorded calls that you've had before, or interview your receptionist right now, or have a phone script that every call is answered, and find all your FAQs and have all of that data combed through and cleaned and available for the AI to be trained on. Because if you just assume the AI out of the box is going to be able to magically answer the phone the way you would answer it, or the way you'd want a human to answer it, and more importantly, it has to be able to handle the exceptions. What happens when someone calls and has a random question, or you get people prank calling you, or telemarketers? Like, all of those things are all variables that have to be answered, because a human would be able to pick up on that nuance. Mm-hmm. A human would realize that, hey, this person is asking something, or they called the wrong number. That doesn't mean the AI is going to understand that and be able to handle it perfectly without proper training.
So rolling into the digital infrastructure pyramid doctrine, and this is extremely important because, and we say that a lot, like, this is important, this is where all of it's important, right? And the tools exist at every single layer of this pyramid, from the base all the way to the very top. And decisions move from the bottom up. That's why we always start at the foundational level, and the execution is systematic. So it's not just sometimes just from the bottom up, but it can go top down, bottom up, sideways. It's all interconnected. So the three connected principles here is that the tools exist at every single layer, and the decisions move from top to bottom, and the execution
from bottom
up. From bottom up, and the execution has to be shifted from humans to systems, but also it goes from systems back to humans as well. Humans and machines are working interconnectedly together.
Yeah, I think the big point what we're trying to make here is that we're not saying that the tools live at the top of the pyramid and the bottom of the pyramid has no tools. No, there are tools everywhere, at every single layer, but the tools are going to be focused on what that layer's function is. So the tools that should be focusing on the most are the ones that are more critical to your infrastructure, which is kind of going back to like the very first Ask the Hive session we talked about. Like, the foundational infrastructure is understanding who owns your domain, how is your email infrastructure being handled, who owns where your website is being hosted. Do you have access to the data that is supplying all of your AI agents?
Or what users have access to what parts or features of these different
And then when you move up the next layer, and we're starting to talk about operations, like, do you have an all-in-one business system, like something like High Level, that actually allows you to handle the entire customer journey into one single system? Or are you trying to piecemeal 50 different systems together? Like, are you using a project management system for orchestration? So something that helps you understand what is being done every day. Like, this is understanding that every layer you should know these are the core infrastructure of your business. These are the things that at every layer you need to be able to control and know which ones are which. And you should be focusing on and taking a lot more time with purchasing ones that are core to the foundational part of the pyramid versus the ones that are at the top. Like, we have found more people have taken more time considering AI tools that are just kind of like a cosmetic widget versus the tools that they use every single day that they rely on.
Because it's cool, right? Ooh, look at that. Look what that can do. Ooh, look at that. Awesome. And what the capabilities of those technologies are in of themselves are pretty cool and amazing. But does that work for you? Because it may or may not. And don't get, this is the shiny object syndrome, right? Or sometimes like the new car. Everyone wants that brand new car. It's that new car smell. Eventually that new car smell wears off. And then you realize, you know what? This vehicle I thought was going to be right for me and my family or what I wanted it for. Not necessarily the case.
Well, that goes back, like I love when people use the new car, right? Because a lot of times, you're drawn to the sports car. It's flashy, it's cool, everyone's gonna think it's amazing. But if you have a family of 6, probably not functional, right? So what you really should be focusing on is function over aesthetics. Even if a legacy technology or tool is clunky and ugly to look at, but functionally works, you should be considering that tool over the shiny object every single day. And this is, again, going back to AI. I've watched a ton of people rip out perfectly good functional tools to go grab a sexier interface, only to realize that the sexy interface that they just bought isn't able to do half of what they were doing with their legacy system. And now they've wasted an incredible amount of money, time, energy, and resources just to abandon and go back to the thing that they were already using, that they probably just needed to have a little bit of upgrades, or maybe there wasn't even anything functionally wrong. They just felt that they had to do something with new stuff because that's what everybody else was doing. Mm-hmm. So you have to be thinking about these decisions through the lens of, is this functionally going to make my business better? How is it going to actually affect my core infrastructure? Who and how many people are going to have to be retrained on it? How long will it truly take for us to actually implement? And is it going to marginally move the difference? Like, are you saving money, time, energy, effort? Like, what are you getting out of making that move? You need to know that and be looking at it through that lens. Don't be looking at it through, wow, this has got a really cool new feature.
It's shiny. It looks neat. And guess what? That was what they sold you on. And that was their ploy the whole time. They sold you on this new shiny object. But if it's going to work long-term for you, they could care less.
And another great point is, if you are a business owner, and you're the person who is going to be buying these tools, interview the people who are going to be the ones having to use it on a daily basis.
Yes.
They are the ones who should be making and at least weighing in on the decision of it, because they're the person who's going to use it every single day. Yeah. And if they don't like it, or they're not going to use it, or they feel like it's going to become restrictive in their process, then that should be a big part of it. I've met so many people who they didn't ask their team who they were going to ask them to use this tool. They just thought, well, I'm going to buy this because I think it'd be better for the business.
Oh, and by the way, this doesn't happen at the SMB level. Corporates do this all the time. Corporations, large enterprises buy a piece of technology and like, all right, well, now we're going to adopt this. And then they get pushback from their team. It's like, well, who the hell authorized this? Well, I did. It's like, but you weren't the person to
use it every day.
Why don't you ask the team?
Yeah. So these are the things that you really want to be making sure that you are taking the time to make those types of decisions. Obviously, you should be trying new things and experimenting with new tools and trying, like, let's say, I'm not saying like don't go and do AI or use AI. Of course, I use AI every single day, but I'm also not quick to constantly jump to the next model or the newest thing, unless the newest thing that I'm looking at, I have a reasonable use case that I can't do with the thing I already have, or it would take a lot more time, because there's still going to be a learning curve to learn the new thing. And
because when you build from the ground up, not the other way around, like this inverted pyramid, it's really simple to know which types of new technologies you should adapt or purchase. Mm-hmm. Because there's an acceptance criteria. You already can look at something like, that's not going to fit in our infrastructure, and here's the reasons why it won't fit. Exactly. That one over there, that one actually will fit, and here are the reasons why it will fit. So that your decision fatigue actually goes down, not up.
Exactly. And so an identical tool stack can yield entirely opposite results based solely on the underlying architecture and knowing that. And so all these tools, like, that's the other reason why it's hard, that you can't just take a recommendation from another person, even in the same industry, even in the same niche, even in the same neighborhood as what you're doing, because depending on your processes, how your company works is going to determine whether or not that tool will be the right fit for you altogether, right?
Or the person making the recommendation, what do you know about their internal infrastructure? What do you know about their documentation? Maybe they don't have any, and they're making their buying decision on a win and a prayer too.
So basically, in closing thoughts here, the business of the past could often build first and organize later because humans adapted to every environment that had already been created. But the businesses of the future must increasingly organize because systems execute what the architecture defines. And when the pyramid is built correctly, technology will create leverage. But when the pyramid is inverted, technology will create weight. And the question is no longer which tools should we be adding? The deeper question is going to be what foundation must exist before the capability can be safely carried more of the business. So building architecture before was asking technology to execute. And you have to build from the data upward, build from the foundation outward. And that pretty much is what's going to wrap today's session. So coming up in the next couple of weeks, we're going to kind of dig even a little bit deeper and actually give some practical applications around like what tools you should be looking at and what are some of the questions you should be thinking about at each level. We'll probably start with the foundational level around organization. And if you love AI and you want to add AI into your business, this next session will probably be one of the most important sessions for you because data is what sets the pace for everything above it.
Data and how it's structured and how the machine can ingest it and actually take action on it.
So we'll look forward to seeing you guys at the next session next week.